Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and our next game console episode. In this episode I'm going to go over another early console that many of you may or may not have tried, but was actually my first console, the Colecovision. We'll talk about how it came about, some of the add-ons and what ultimately led to its early demise. However, the Colecovision wasn't this company's first console, so we should go back a bit in the company's history, which is, interestingly enough, not even electronics at all. So stick around as we dig into the history of Colecovision and its consoles. Surprisingly to some of you, okay, myself included, Colecovision actually goes back way further than one would have thought, all the way back to 1932. However, when they started, they actually began as Connecticut Leather Company. Yeah, you heard that right. Coleco started out as a leather company. More accurately, they would actually sell supplies to repair shoes to shoe shops. This would change in 1938 when the company would shift its focus to supplying rubber footwear for soldiers in World War II. Demand was heavy, and by the end of the war, the company was larger and in much better shape than it had ever been, and by the 1950s, it actually started making leather crafting kits among other products. In fact, their leather moccasins kit was actually selected for the Child Guidance Prestige toy. This incentivized them to start investing more into the toy business officially. This was so successful, they actually ended up selling off the leather part of their business and rebranding as Coleco Industries. Fun fact, Coleco was a combination of the company's original name, Connecticut equaling CO, leather equaling LE, and company equaling CO, the whole thing combining into Coleco. Neat, huh? After they sold off their leather goods company, they would then acquire another company, Kestrel Corporation. This company manufactured inflatable pools and pool toys. This coincidentally led Coleco to becoming the largest manufacturer of swimming pools in the world. Talk about a weird and diverse amount of products, and it wouldn't end there either. They'd actually continued to dive into toys, which served them pretty well until they decided to expand into another new industry in the 1970s. Diving into the world of snowmobiles. Yeah, I bet you guys didn't see that one coming. I know I didn't. This was oddly a funny decision given that the business had grown to $48.6 million, and it turned out to be a bad bet as well, as snowfall was lower than normal, which led to poor sales of their snowmobiles. However, shortly after this poor acquisition, the video game market started to take off with the introduction of Atari's game Pong. Before long, dozens of companies started to jump into the market, and Coleco was no exception, jumping into business with a company called Telestar. Now, this got them to using the General Electronics chips, which were commonly called Pong on a chip. This was a hugely popular chipset at the time, as everyone wanted to get in on the Pong market. However, given the fact that General Electronics underestimated the demand, most people didn't get their full order of chips. This happened to work in Coleco's favor as they got their order in early enough and the unit sold well enough, selling nearly 1 million units. Now, this was a double-edged sword, though, primarily because General Electronics could sell these chips to anyone. So almost everyone had a Pong clone, and there wasn't really anything Atari could do about it, given the fact that Pong itself was a clone of another game called Tennis. And before long, the market was saturated with Pong clones, not only in the home, but in the arcades as well. So much so that interest quickly began to taper off with the game. This, however, really didn't deter Coleco. I mean, at this point, they basically just decided to keep in the electronics industry and started to get into the early handheld market. One of the early ones that they had being Electronic Quarterback.
Ball one, Mattel's lowest price electronic football game.
And I'm electronic quarterback, Coleco's lowest price.
I run from the line of scrimmage.
I start in the backfield and follow my blockers.
Blockers? I don't have any blockers.
I got 7 men on defense.
7? I've only got 5.
I can even pass.
I can't pass.
My receiver runs short, long, any pattern.
Pattern? I don't even have a receiver.
Or I can score a safety.
Safety?
Coleco's electronic quarterback, a lot more football for the money.
Which wasn't really a traditional video game. Much like most of the handheld games around this time, it used a series of LEDs to display the screen to the player, and you'd use the buttons on the console to direct the action. It was a simple and easy thing to build given the available technology and how cheap LED screens were getting at the time. Now, they made multiple other versions of this game, including head-to-head ones like football, basketball, baseball, soccer, and hockey. They would even eventually expand this market to making mini arcade units in 1982. Some of you may have had some of them, particularly the Pac-Man, Galaxian, Donkey Kong, or Frogger versions. These were cool little units. They looked like a super small arcade cabinet that would just sit on your desk. These were really successful for being so close to the arcade experience in such a small package. Pac-Man alone sold 1.5 million units in its first year. The other three I mentioned would sell a combined 1.5 million as well. This opened Coleco's eyes to the possibility of a home video arcade market. In late 1982, based on the former success, Coleco decided to re-enter the console market. The reason I say re-enter is that Telstar actually had multiple versions, some of them having multiple games on it, technically making it a bit of a home console. This new console was called the Colecovision.
Then the advanced intelligence of CBS Colecovision materialized. It's got better graphic definition, just like arcade games. It's got more changing screens, more to challenge any game wizard. You can add on modules to expand the system into an 80K computer, and more. It's the most powerful video game system available. CBS ColecoVision.
And they aimed to take a big swing at Atari and Intellivision, who'd been duking out for years now with their own console war.
Almost anything. So when Mattel Electronics asked me to compare their Intellivision games with Atari, I gave it a try. I compared Atari baseball with Intellivision and found Intellivision played much more like real baseball. Then I compared Atari football with Intellivision. Again, Intellivision played more like the real game. In my opinion, if you try them both, there's only one conclusion you can come to. Intellivision from Mattel Electronics.
They weren't really playing around either, because they had nabbed one of the larger games of the time as a launch game, Donkey Kong. This was intended to be an exclusive deal. However, the deal was only verbal, and at CES that year, Nintendo gave the rights over to Atari. This led to another conversation with Yamauchi's daughter to find out what the heck happened, and later that day, or a couple days later, they had rights to the game, but they had lost the ability to keep it exclusive. It was then that they did something that shocked everyone at the time. They packed the game with a console. Let me rephrase that so you understand. They packed one of the hottest games of the year as a pack-in for their console. Talk about a ballsy move. This move worked. The console sold 500,000 units by Christmas, outselling the Atari 5200 that had launched in November and sold over 1 million units by early 1983. And there was a good reason why. You see, Coleco had a trick up their sleeve. While everyone else was using more inexpensive chips, Coleco had been secretly building a computer in the shape of a console by installing the Zilog Z80 chip, which, while originally intended for embedded systems, it was also a very popular choice for home computers as well. This gave Coleco an edge in graphical capability and in processing power over any system that was out on the market at the time. Reveling in their success, Coleco started launching add-ons to the console. One of the very first ones was called Gemini. This allowed the system to play Atari 2600 cartridges. This obviously didn't sit well with Atari, who sued Coleco. Luckily for Coleco, they managed to prove that they made the device from off-the-shelf parts, and it only provided power and clock input with video input without translating the Atari cartridges. The companies would eventually settle out of court, with Coleco beginning to license Atari's patents. This wouldn't be the only expansion that Coleco would come out with. The next one was a steering wheel controller. Now, it wasn't the first controller to be called a steering wheel controller. Technically, Atari driving controllers came out before this one. However, they looked more like a Pong paddle controller with a turn knob that didn't have a limiter and a button on the side for what I assume is the gas. Coleco took a different tact with their approach. Their controller actually had a steering wheel and had a side compartment that would hold the foot pedal, which would then plug into the controller itself and sit on the floor. You could then slot one of your Colecovision controllers in that place and use it as a gear shift. Another nice thing about it though is that it came with its own game, Turbo. I actually had this game as a kid, and it's one of the few racing games I remember actually having fun with. I used to love how when you switched gears higher, your car started to look more like a sports car or an F1 car. It was a cool idea with one major drawback. It took 4 C-cell batteries. I mean, I can only imagine it needed some power supply because it just couldn't draw enough power from the controller port in order to register the inputs correctly. Honestly, the idea of needing 4 C batteries for this thing is a bit bizarre to me. I don't truly understand it well. The other downside is it only really worked with a handful of games. Roughly 7 in total, with the most notable ones being Bump and Jump and Dukes of Hazzard outside of Turbo, of course. On top of this controller, Colecovision had a few other controllers that they came out with, one of which was called the Roller Controller. Now this was a trackball or one of those ball controllers that came packed with a game called Slither, which was effectively a variant on Centipede. Much like the steering wheel, this controller had some limited functionality working with War Games, Omega Race, and Atari Centipede for the most part. They also dropped the Super Action Controller. This was a one-handed controller with a ball-top arcade stick, 4 buttons near the fingers, and a 12-button pad on the top. This was apparently used for Super Action Baseball, which it came with, along with Super Action Boxing, Super Action Football as well. On top of this, it worked with the arcade conversion of Frontline. Honestly, I'm not very familiar with most of these games in particular. Outside of all these controllers, they came out with one last module, and this one's probably the most interesting one, and quite possibly one of the most controversial ones due to the ripples that it actually made, and that's the Super Game Module, or SGM. This was designed to use a diskette like Super Game Wafer that would store saves, stats, and high scores all on a magnetic tape, which for a console was really ambitious. Everyone was excited about it, and sure, it would be a hit. More so when they found out they'd be working with RCA and Ralph Baer himself on the design. However, for reasons unknown, it got delayed and then cancelled. Or rather, I should say, converted to the Coleco Atom.
Davy's report card.
It's worse than last time.
He's just not interested. His friend Billy made the honor roll.
He's no smarter than Davy.
But he had help. Joe and Peg got him an Atom.
Atom is the only affordable home computer that comes complete. And Atom offers a variety of educational software that takes minutes to learn. Kids get so involved that learning becomes easier and more fun.
We're getting you an Atom.
Really?
Really.
Atom, the smartest gift you can give your family.
This made the Colecovision essentially a computer, which it kinda was already anyway. However, this expansion caused some issues between 2 other companies, Atari and Nintendo. You see, Atari had exclusive PC rights to Donkey Kong. This expansion model made the Colecovision into a computer. When Atari saw this at CES, they were, well, let's just say upset is one word. This caused them to break ties with Nintendo, whose new console they were going to manufacture and help distribute in the States. Ironically, this would actually turn out to be a bit of a blessing because around this time, the video game crash of the United States would hit, caused by a number of issues, not the least of which was the number of low-quality games hitting the market. This would cause issues with multiple companies, Atari, Television, and yes, Colecovision. Ultimately, this would be part of what killed off Colecovision. The fact that they got into the game later than most, around 1982, just before the market started having its downturn, didn't give them enough time to establish enough capital to really withstand that kind of downturn. This, coupled with the fact that they had multiple expansion modules come out within a year of the console's release, spread a lot of the resources pretty thin. Add in the issues with the Atom, they had defective digital data packs and magnetic surges on boot up that would pretty much erase any data cassette nearby, and its cost being around $750 made it kind of a bad buy, especially when you look at the fact that a Commodore 64 and a Colecovision combined were cheaper. That didn't help things at all. All these things made for their downturn and their ultimate failure in the electronics market. By 1984, they were shutting down all their operations, including the Atom. They were simply just losing too much money to stay afloat in this market. At this point, they decided to exit the electronics market and focus on toy lines, having a hit almost immediately with the Cabbage Patch doll, which was one of the earliest mass hits in the toy market, causing a bit of a shopping frenzy around Christmas of that year. They would later have board game hits with Aggravation and Perfection, giving them just enough capital to pick up Cell Chow and Reicher, who made Scrabble, Parcheesi, and Trivial Pursuit, of which they paid $75 million for that company. They also launched an ALF-based plush based off the popular sitcom. However, with the purchase of Cell Chow and Riker, along with the declining interest in Cabbage Patch dolls, they would start to lose far too much money, and by 1988, they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. However, what do you guys think of Colecovision? Did any of you ever have one, and if so, what are your thoughts on it? What were some of your favorite games? Let me know in the comments. While you're there, if you don't mind, leave this video a like. And if you haven't, consider following the channel. That helps me out a ton. Till we meet again though, have a great rest of your day, and happy gaming!